things that, this is a really interesting one. We'll kind of flow into it now with karma and reincarnation, because there's some ideas in theosophy that nobody's ever heard of. And so you're kind of starting from scratch with people. But pretty much everybody's heard of karma and reincarnation. So, what we're engaging with is people who already have some kind of idea in their mind of what they think karma is or what they think reincarnation is. And they might get that from it's not that these things were invented by theosophy. So people know them. Maybe they grew up in India and they just inherited these ideas from their parents, and they know them through a certain lens. Or maybe they learned about them through Buddhism and they learned about it there through a certain lens. So it's like we're not starting on a topic totally from scratch, right? So it'll be interesting to see. We can address it in whatever ways we think is going to work. But everybody knows the word karma and reincarnation, and there's probably all kinds of ideas about it that differ widely from what you're going to find in theosophy. So maybe that's a starting point.
You see it a lot in pop psychology, and you see it a lot in the movies and in theater. It's incorporated, and it may very well be that the exposure to it is, through the culture, not through any philosophical system at all. So, you get that expression, karma's a bitch. Where's that come from? Well, that's Hollywood,
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's whole movies, that bring in the theme of reincarnation too. There was one that Tom Hanks was in that was super long.
Cloud Atlas.
Cloud Atlas.
It was a good movie.
Mm-hmm.
So
very close to the theosophical perspective too.
With crunch timelines, which is an interesting one, because if we talk about sort of the way theosophy addresses reincarnation, it's going to differ in some systems. And when you go to, like you said, Jerry, the sort of pop psychology versions or the more new age versions, or even some of the older traditional versions, you might have the idea that somebody dies and 2 years later they're reincarnated. And theosophy has a different view on that. And I was thinking maybe one of the big things is that theosophy has some underlying ideas that support how it talks about karma and reincarnation that aren't the same ideas that you find in other traditions. Like, for example, the Buddhists bring in karma and reincarnation, but they have an idea that there's no enduring self, right? Whereas theosophy talks about karma and reincarnation, but we talk about with this idea of a reincarnating ego, a self that continues to reincarnate, that isn't the personality, but is something that endures. So there's all these different shades that different traditions put on it, and people might have no idea of how theosophy actually addresses it. And theosophy tries to address the why. Why is there karma? Why is there reincarnation? Which I would imagine most people who know about karma and reincarnation haven't necessarily thought super deeply about why is reincarnation a thing even.
You had mentioned that in a previous conversation, and I have a different understanding of it in regards to what the Buddhists say. I think it's more in the Theravada tradition that you get the anatma idea, a no self. But in the Mahayana tradition, I don't think that's the case. There's a concept of self in the Mahayana tradition that comes out of Tibet. So I think you're right in the one case, but maybe not in the other.
Well, it's an interesting one because when you take the northern Buddhist view, or the Mahayana view, you have different ways of approaching it. So you have what's called the Abhidharma, and then you have the Madhyamaka, and they take it in a little bit different direction. So they'll bring in that anatma doctrine, but they'll say it's kind of a different version of how to define what it is that's actually reincarnating. So they may have an idea that there's a continuity, right? But they don't have the same kind of conception of a reincarnating ego as we find in theosophy. Not quite, anyway. So there's some shade of difference there. Yeah. The what does reincarnate is a big question, right? What is reincarnating?
But see, I think one of the things the anatma doctrine in the Buddhist tradition is emphasizing is the fact that the personality, the name and form, is not a permanent entity that's going to last through eternity.
And that's what they're combating, that idea. That
exactly.
It's really not the person you think you are is not the real.
Right.
It's
and that gets mistaken for there's no self whatsoever. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
people who are outside of Buddhism will say, well, they just think like scientists do. That as soon as you're dead, that's done. You're done. It's over.
So you get the popular misconception about Buddhism, which is not what
Yeah.
a lot of Buddhists think. They think
Yeah.
that somehow I'm responsible for my actions now, and there will be consequences in the future for me and everyone that I'm in contact with. And that's a really powerful kind of idea. Is we take responsibility for our own activities, our own actions, our own motives, and not blame somebody else outside. And I think that's what Blavatsky really focuses on, like in her works, especially Key to Theosophy and the Secret Doctrine, where it really is the whole idea of somebody else can do it. Somebody else can be responsible for what I do, and can save me from my own mistakes and my own greed and my own selfishness. It's just really, she calls it a really pernicious doctrine that somebody else is somehow can step in and you know through their blood, through their sacrifice, whatever.
Yeah.
She goes to great lengths to show how it's just such a destructive idea.
Yeah, the whole
That's what it,
vicarious atonement
and that's what it
idea,
comes
right?
down to is what are the implications of ideas like karma and reincarnation? How would it really play out if we really if human beings generally felt that they were responsible, and that if not in this life, that they would reap the consequences in a future one, and that this life was a result of a past life, set of choices, and then further that we're all interconnected. We can't do anything without influencing and affecting others. So, then you get into the whole idea of distributive karma, that we share this one life, and we're going to, impact other people.
So let me play devil's advocate for a second on that, because it's a really interesting
Sure.
point. So one of the responses to, what might the world be like if everybody follows karma and reincarnation, the average person might say, okay, well, just look at India, because India is the place where people have believed in karma and reincarnation for thousands of years. And what's the result then? Now that's an interesting question to try to address. And are there flaws or shortcomings in the way that karma and reincarnation have been understood or practiced or applied in the main cultures where that's been a central feature?
Well, hold on a second. You're saying, okay, in India, there's a predominant quote unquote belief in reincarnation.
Historically.
And historically. And the comment you're making is that see what that's gotten them? Is that what you said?
In a certain sense, so playing
Was
devil's
that
advocate.
is that implying that their culture's gone to hell in a handbasket?
Well, what do we say? What do we say about that? So
Well, it does.
here's an example.
No.
In India, pollution is horrible, like horrifyingly bad. Is that does that come out of? Is that in any way related to the belief system of culture?
It's
Things like that.
It's the adoption of Western economic policies is what it represents. It has nothing to do with their philosophical
Well,
inquiries.
it does. It has something to do with their philosophy, because even one of the Mahatmas makes a comment about that, and that is that reincarnation is seen in many instances as a means to generate better karma. That doesn't get you rid of the problem. That just you come back and you hopefully have better karma. And so the Mahatma points out there that that is rather a passive interpretation of the teaching of reincarnation and karma. The only reason why you would make good karma is so that in the future, your next life will be better, not to ultimately get rid of it, so to speak. Whereas in theosophy, it basically comes down to get rid of karma, of reincarnation, and then you get rid of individual karma as well, of course. So yeah, there is some. So he refers to that passive laissez-faire, like the French say, like, okay. So there seems to be, and then of course you have also different varieties, like, some of them believe that they may come back into the animal kingdom or an insect or a plant or whatever. And the perspective from a theosophical perspective is totally different.
Well, and
One's a human being, always a human being. Go ahead, Jerry.
it could also incentivize procrastination. I'll take
Exactly.
care of that
Yeah.
problem in another lifetime.
Next time.
I'm not up to it right now. So
Yeah. I'm not trying to pick on India, by the way. I'm just saying, one of the things that I appreciate about theosophy is it addresses sort of the mechanics of karma and reincarnation and the kind of why that underlies it in ways that I think can help sort of avoid some of those pitfalls. Like one example, for instance, is theosophy. Underpinning the idea of karma and reincarnation in theosophy is a worldview that includes evolution in a longer, much wider scale than even material evolution in science. Once you have the idea of evolution underneath karma and reincarnation, then you have the idea that it's going somewhere. There's a purpose to it or a goal to it. It's not like we just ended up here because we screwed up or because it's by accident or the whole point is just to make your next life better. It's like there's a bigger picture, that supports it.
Well,
there's two things that are primarily forgotten, especially in the West, and that is with regard to the term meaning and function. Everything we do in our life, consciously or subconsciously, we try to give it a meaning, and it is also functional at the same time. And the problem is then, okay, if there would only be one life, we die and it's over. That all comes to nothing, meaning and function. So there has to be something that perpetuates through time, so to speak, that extends meaning and function into the future. If you drop that, then anything that has meaning just for one life goes to nothing, because when you're dead and there would be no karma, it's over and done. You basically can do what you like. If you want to kill people because you don't like them, rape women, by all means, go ahead, because there's nothing there. And that's also another aspect that comes into play, is the subject of the death penalty, for instance. We still apply death penalty in certain states as if we know what's going to happen after death. It may be a heaven, it may be a hell, or it may only be hell or heaven. It may be reincarnation, it may be nothing. So what is then the function of the death penalty as a punishment?
Well, so just a practical,
if you just die in a car accident, there's your punishment. Done. It's exactly the same thing. So it's important to realize what happens when this life is over. Does it continue or is it done? If it's done, you can do what you like. It may not be what we call, but that's not human. Well, that's just a concept that we have developed as humans to live in a society that is livable. But if you don't agree with it, don't agree with it. There is thousands of criminals that died happily in their bed, no recourse to anything. The law couldn't get to them. So that's an important element, that meaning and function.
Wes, Jerry, what do you guys
Did that
think?
blow you all away or something?
Well, I think in the field of criminal justice, they wouldn't see it quite the way that you put it. In criminal justice, they would teach you. My son went through a criminal justice program in college, and we had many discussions about it. The whole idea of incarceration is to take someone who's doing ill and harm to others and get them out of the picture. The death penalty is just a severe version of that. That person's harming society. So we're going to end their life so that they're no longer a harm to society. So that's the practical value of the death penalty from conventional thinking.
Yeah, but most of the people who are proponents of that idea are also Christians.
True. Yeah.
So there is something to it.
But the point of it is to get them out of the picture.
It becomes a state issue. Yeah. The state decision to.
Go ahead, Wes.
I was just saying the state makes the decision that we don't want them in society, and whether it's Christian or materialist or whatever view it is, it's a practical measure of the state to eliminate those that are a burden to society in some way. So I don't know if
Or
the issue
danger.
of or dangerous, exactly. And so I don't know if it's a matter of even being concerned with what happens afterwards. That's not even an issue in the
But it
legal
can be an
system.
issue if you see it also as punishment, which
Yeah,
it is
and very
also
often it
applied for
is.
that reason.
It's the
It is no
consequence.
punishment because we don't know what happens.
Right.
For all we know, we may put all criminals in heaven because
Yeah.
there's nothing but that. You see
But there
how
is the
stupid
element of
that the
punishment,
idea is?
that's the
Uh,
ultimate society consequence for having violated the laws against murder, that kind of thing. It's all a
But
practice.
that's also true for people who die from diseases or in accidents then. So problematic.
mhm.
I
So
think it's something that, yeah, go ahead.
here's the question on that then. So like, here's a real world example. Uh, does a theosophical understanding of karma and reincarnation change our perspective on something like that? How might we look at those kind of, because I think one of the things that we really want to get to in talking about karma and reincarnation is like, how does it affect our life? Like, people might take the ideas of karma and reincarnation, a lot of other ideas in theosophy, and say those are all well and good for the philosophical conversations and such, but like, does it matter? Does it matter if I even care or believe them or think about them? Or so how does understanding karma and reincarnation impact how we might approach social issues like that, or
Well,
cultural things?
I think you've hit the nail on the head, John, because I think in genuine philosophy, certainly in theosophy, the idea is what does the idea do to change my life, to make life better? It the interest is not to get people to believe things. There's no interest in getting anyone to believe anything. What there is an interest in is improving human life, and collectively and individually. So the question, putting your question, the same question you've just asked, just maybe in different form, is how does reincarnation and karma change the way I would live? How does it change my life? How does it make my life better? Is an interesting
And that
question.
of other people. And that
And that of
other
other
people.
people. That's excellent. Expand it that way. But that, I think, is the essence of the question, in a sense that we kind of need to answer. I mean, we have a lot of assumptions that society makes and culture makes and our education makes. One of them I wanted to bring up is life fair? Because everyone's running around saying life's not fair. So is that true or not? And that has a bearing on whether karma is real or not. So
That's a
go ahead.
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm finished making my point.
Well, I was thinking like that's actually a perfect place to start, because I mean we've been talking for a bit here, but we should probably circle back to sort of, how do we actually envision? Let's start with karma. We can take sort of one at a time. How do we actually define and envision what karma is? These different people will have different understanding of it, and we have some writings in theosophy that address questions like, is karma just punishment? Is it just I did something bad and I get punished by God or the universe or whatever? So in theosophy, I'll just open this for all of us. How do we define and understand what karma even is?
Well, a big picture, just start with the idea that all actions have consequences, whether they're practical or mental or moral or spiritual, however you want to define them. It's a general statement about maybe the overall fairness of life in a big picture. So then it's really idea of responsibility. Upon what basis should a human being assume responsibility for their own actions? And without the hope that if not this life, a future life, that there'd be some field for that responsibility to circle back to us, we could say, and come to full fruition. And it's a whole idea of hope that, hey, there are other opportunities. Think about how many people just are totally frustrated by their lives. There's just, no matter what they do, they can't get ahead. They can't cut a break. They can't save a dime. They can't do anything for themselves or their families. Really, really hard lives. It could be argued that, that they could take some comfort in the idea that the cycle turns. Eventually there'll be an opportunity for a better life. And it may not be this lifetime, but there is that hope for the future. And the same way with taking responsibility. I got here somehow because of what I've chosen in the past. So that same law, same general law would give me an opportunity in the future. If I, do the best that I can and follow maybe a more ethical approach to life. I mean, it's all tied into motives, isn't it?
Well, in Theosophy, also the idea of karma expands the levels on which it operates. Because let's be honest, even science accepts karma on the physical plane. Throw
Sure.
a ball against the wall, it's going to come back. Any action you take will have its effect. But to take it to a different level, on a psychic level or a mental level and moral responsibility, that's another thing. That seems to be what makes it difficult for a lot of people. I can think what I want. It doesn't have any effect. And Theosophy says, well, it does. And that's an important distinction there, because does it mean that everything that happens to us, we are morally responsible for it? The teaching is no. You can be at the wrong place in the wrong time. And it is referred to as an accident in the Key to Theosophy. HBB talks about it. Because you have taken physical action to get to a certain place, and that may have an effect. Doesn't mean necessarily that you are morally responsible for putting yourself there, of course. So there's these different levels of karma, and I think that's something that we need to take into account in a conversation on karma.
Jerry.
Yeah, getting back to the initial question, like, what is it to begin with? We're talking about the cause and effect component, and that's somewhat obvious in life and in nature. But I think what often is not added to that, kind of philosophically, is that it's a balancing principle. It's a harmonizing principle. So we know, like in ecology and in biology, that the systems in place have balancing principles to them, so that life can move forward and things don't. When things fall out of balance, things die. There's extinction. There's desertification, stuff like that. So nature has balancing principles to make sure that there's continuity. So I think it's important to look at karma as a balancing and a harmonizing principle. And sometimes that, maybe in its consequences seem painful, but there's, for example, to exercise to regain one's health, this might be painful and difficult, but it's necessary for health. So I like that idea that karma is a principle of balance and harmony.
Yeah, and that's actually one thing that Theosophy talks about in a slightly different way than other traditions about karma, but definitely in a clearer way, that it's a like equilibrizing. It's like and one of the ways we start with karma in Theosophy is sort of big picture, that it's a universal law. Like there's nothing that's not impacted by karma. So it's not just a law that's, about humans and our rights and wrongs and impact and all of that.
Yeah.
It's more fundamental. It's actually almost perhaps the law of laws. It's the sort of, in a certain sense, the most fundamental law. And the word karma, of course, just simply means action. So it's like we can expand out to this very large picture. And then you immediately come across what you brought up there, Jerry, is there's a sort of worldview in Theosophy that you could say metaphysically there is inherent a kind of balance in the universe. In reality, universe is maybe not the right word, but in reality, there's kind of inherent balance. And so
Or a tendency to restore balance.
and that's where karma comes in, because that, something that Judge says is that karma sort of responds to disturbances. So, you can kind of imagine an idea of everything in a metaphysical sense to be in sort of perfect equilibrium. And then if there's a disturbance to that, if there's something that moves something in a direction, then there'll be a corrective measure, which gives a
Well,
different
yeah.
view, right? Because we're not
Mm.
just talking about karma as I did something wrong and now it's going to come and bite me in the ass. Like that's kind of how we talk about it, right? But it's like it's actually correcting. It's correcting something. It's course correcting. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Pierre.
Well, that's also the result that you could say from a purely technical perspective. What is the source of karma? Well, it's the fact that everything we do is based on a potentiality. Otherwise, you can't do it. When that potentiality comes into being, we have motion. And that's what karma is, motion. And that causes disturbances in its operation, both cosmically and in our own lives. And then there needs to be a mechanism that restores that balance, because there is apparently for motion, there is a striving towards what you could call inertia to move things forward as they are. And there are disturbing factors both in the cosmos and within ourselves, and so there is that constant tendency to restore that balance. It doesn't mean that with inertia, rest, but it means that something moves forward and continues that motion until there is a disturbance. Once there is a disturbance, there is a need to harmonize that disturbance again. And that can lead to friction among people and 10,000 other different examples that you can give for that. So motion is fundamental, you could say, with karma.
I think there's another word that we're sort of, with this part of the conversation on karma, you sort of start circling around a bit, and that's the concept of justice. So how does our how might a theosophical view on karma coincide with the idea of justice?
Well, it's kind of the idea of harmony, isn't it? It is that whole assumption of kind of the matrix of life itself has a tendency toward just restoring broken equilibrium. So since that restoration, we could call it justice in one sense. If things are restored to the way they ought to be, might be a kind of maybe a generally accepted definition of justice. Is you say, well, what would be right if something goes wrong? Well, put things back right the way they ought to be, and you'd have to add the component of that, of the idea of growth or evolution to that, because there's something gained by that apparent loss of equilibrium, that apparent loss of balance. uh, just restoring justice, it seemed to be a kind of a healing process that couldn't take place if there weren't the disturbance to begin with. So there's always that sort of tendency moving forward of nature is kind of goes along with that inherent assumption in theosophy of that idea of the universal one life, that there's a balance inherent in that, or a tendency toward balance as well as growth, so that you
Yeah.
have that constant dynamic of disturbance and restoration. It goes on, and we call it day and night, sleeping and waking, and everything else. But it's really isn't it, Jerry? You know more than this. You expert on plants. It's how plants grow. There has to be some kind of the motion and restoration of balance in any kind of growth. Maybe that's too abstract for our purposes, but
Well, I was going to go with connecting the idea of justice with fairness. And when we think about the concept of fairness in relation to karma, I think we have to go to the place where we would say that all things are equal under the law. So in other words, they're not exceptions. Like, I can get away with it, but you can't.
Mm.
There is law in the universe. If you don't sleep, you don't eat, if you drive your car into a wall, there's going to be a consequence that's the same for everyone who would do those things. Right?
Mhm.
So the universe is fair in the sense that all beings, all creatures within it are treated fairly under the law. That doesn't mean that, it's going to make it easy. or that there's any special treatment for anyone. But I think, even a little child recognizes what fairness means. How come he got 2 cookies and I only got 1? Right?
Yeah. Yeah, grandkids,
So-
you know that.
So I think it's kind of built into the very fabric of being human, the concept of fairness. And I think that's where a simple way to get started with justice. Karma is a law that's impersonal. It doesn't play favorites. It's not making, it has no hierarchy of attribution. It's going to act whether you like it or not. And in
Yeah, I
that
think-
sense, it's just.
Yeah, but it comes
Well,
back
it's
to that question that most people have of, well, or observation, life's not fair. So we have this disconnect, this equilibrium between our ideal that life ought to be fair and the fact that it just doesn't appear to be. Not for me anyway, is how so many people see it. So isn't that where reincarnation gives a scope to the whole idea of justice, because it's, if we only look at individual human life, there's literally billions of examples where life is not fair. Children born in the desert in a famine it's not fair. It's not to that child. It's not. Maybe some larger picture of balance or equilibrium it is, but not to that child, not to its parents, not to the community it's born in. It's totally unfair. So if we can't you have the idea of multiple lifetimes to kind of explain that balancing process. It's worth the you might as well be just a blind materialist, because that's all we see.
And that's part of the problem of the fairness and justice idea. When we start talking about it, we tend to look at it in materialistic terms, like, why do I have to be poor, or I want to be rich, or like it would be fair if I could have a big house too, or a fancy car. The universe is not judging what's fair in relation to in materialistic terms, I don't think.
Mhm.
You could say that if there's an educational component to this balancing principle of karma, that the learning opportunities are universal and perpetual. Like whatever's happening to you, whether you label it good or bad. Because often, wouldn't you agree that there's a lot of things that we initially think are bad, and then after some time passes, we go, oh my gosh, I really needed that wake-up call. I really needed to be kicked in the butt because I was moving in the wrong direction, and that was going to lead to disaster. So it's interesting that, when we think about justice and fairness, we often think of it in materialistic terms rather than terms of educational terms, maybe.
Yeah,
and there is an important element to that as well, that if there is to be truly a universal justice, the correction needs to be able to cross the boundary of life and death, as we call it, and extend into the future,
yeah, because the opportunity is not necessarily going to occur in any given moment or situation.
Maybe
this is-
not in this life,
Yeah.
the restoration.
Yeah, so this is why, in Theosophy, we talk about karma and reincarnation as like twin doctrines, that you kind of can't really have one without the other, or at least you can't really understand how one operates without the other. So they come together. And I was thinking one of the things that we would need to bring in here at this point is the bigger picture of evolution, the bigger picture of sort of the theosophical view of like spiritual evolution. Because Jerry, one thing you brought up is we can look at the operation of karma as learning opportunities. A materialist could counter back with that and say, what's the point? What's the point of learning? And so in Theosophy, you also have this underpinning of this larger worldview where we see humanity as part of a larger, very long-term evolution. We could call it spiritual evolution, because we're not just talking physical evolution. And one thing that's different about Theosophy and the common views of evolution is The technical term is teleological. So theosophy posits that evolution has a goal or a purpose. In modern science, evolution is a mechanism, but it doesn't have inherent purpose in it. So theosophy has this idea that all of this stuff we're going through life to life as a we call it a life wave of human beings moving through this system, is that there's purpose and meaning to it. Therefore, there's purpose and meaning to the learning opportunities that are there, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
The way in which karma and reincarnation are paired together is an important part of the discussion. So
Yeah,
we can move into that now.
I want to emphasize something. I really think that one of the central questions that and assumptions that we're dealing with that hold humanity back and limits our pursuing our potential is this idea that life's unfair. So, actually that, the vast majority of people, even in the most prosperous country here in the United States, is struggling to live from paycheck to paycheck. Has their material circumstances are dire and difficult. How can that be fair? How can life be fair if so many people have? And then how can it be that a handful of families, 3 or 4 families, have half the wealth of one country? So you and then you just look at your own life and you look at the life of the people around you. There's all this hardship that life is tough. There's injuries, there's loss of life, divorces, et cetera, et cetera. Life's really, really hard. So it's become commonplace to just say, well, all of that is happenstance, bad luck. And how could you possibly say that there's a balancing principle in the universe? How could you possibly say that life is just when we're surrounded by all the inequalities of life? I think we really can't talk about this subject of karma and reincarnation without addressing that concern.
Exactly. I mean, that's the concern right on the ground, right? Like that's the actual reality of everybody's lives. So, we could spend 2 hours talking about karma and reincarnation on a metaphysical level, and it'd be super interesting. But it's not going to apply to that circumstance.
But here's the thing, John. Is there another mechanism that we can use to infuse justice into life apart from reincarnation and karma? Do we have other solutions? We got to run with the solutions that we come up with, right? So is there another solution? I don't see it.
Well, we have all these different worldviews sort of competing with each other in our world today. And it's a really interesting thing because, for most of human history, you might have grown up in a village and lived your life in one area where you only knew one worldview. So now we have a situation where we're exposed to a lot of different worldviews and we can kind of analyze them a bit and weigh how they play out in life and the impact they have on different people's lives and such. I think one of the things that we have to sort of address with a theosophical view of karma and reincarnation is there's a kind of shift in perspective about why we're here. So if you take most common perspectives on human life, it's either going to be something, Abrahamic, where or some of the Hindu traditions where you have the idea that, there's a God and souls are put into the world and you live a life and you go up and that's your thing. You have materialistic ideas about life where essentially there is no ultimate meaning or purpose. We can apply meaning and purpose, but there's no ultimate one. The theosophy takes a perspective that there is a reason we're here. And so if there's a reason we're here, if there's a why to it, then that can start addressing some of those inequalities and difficulties that we face, because maybe the difficulty has a bigger purpose than we think it does in our immediate view of it.
Well, the most common kind of alternative view, you'd say, to the way things are, is kind of in a way a materialistic one, and it basically says that, well, there's those few people at the top and it's their greed that is constricting everybody else's life. So the best thing to do is redistribute what they have and share. So we really have to fix a system rather than human nature. We just got to redistribute or have a better understanding of how to share wealth and that sort of thing. But that kind of breaks down because behind it is a whole set of assumptions, about human nature, the nature of society, and kind of an assumption that, hey, if we were in their position, we'd probably be just as greedy as they are. So it's kind of a circular kind of argument in a way, and a lot of social progressives and reformists, go about wanting to fix the system. Let's make it a little more just, a little more equitable, a little bit more fair, so that everybody has enough to eat, that kind of thing. And in and of itself, probably a laudable endeavor. But inevitably, those individuals almost become cynical about the possibilities because they run into the intractable, fact of human nature. So, and the assumptions everybody shares that if they had more, they'd be better off. Not necessarily the case. Or if they were in the position of those with wealth and power, they do exactly the same thing those that are in positions of wealth and power. So, I mean, Blavatsky makes it really clear. We need a new ideal of evolution, but also just simple altruism. What does it mean to be human? And what is the best kind of, I guess, basic assumptions we could share, that would make that idea of universal brotherhood, the first real object of the whole idea of theosophy, to make that more realizable. I mean, it's in a way kind of a very practical sort of alternative. I think Pete's right. What other system would we put in place, and what would be the consequences? Clearly, simply trying to reform the existing systems is not likely to work. I mean, you could take a 5,000-year view of human history and say the wealth has always been concentrated in the hands of a few. Why would today be any different? So then we really need as you say, a whole different view of evolution, and what does altruism mean? And can karma and reincarnation promote those ideals or not? I think really are they, in other words, are they useful ideas in terms of their consequences? Clearly, the Western religious systems haven't worked. The Eastern religious systems materialized into, getting better karma for oneself or a better life hasn't really worked. So what's the bigger picture that's needed? It's an open question. But I think Theosophy offers some very tantalizing suggestions as to what the path forward might look like. What are the fundamental assumptions we might make about ourselves and the world that could make for a much better society, better relationships with ourselves and with the earth?
So that goes
Uh-huh.
to say that isms are not going to save our skin
Yeah, yeah, communism,
yeah,
socialism,
for the
whatever.
simple
Yeah.
reason that they are imposed externally upon all the people. So
Yeah, yeah.
another approach is necessary that focuses more on education in connection with, for instance, ethics. It doesn't mean that capitalism or socialism, that there are no values in it that and we have to drop them, but it is fundamentally we have to change the perspective of people to life rather than imposing an ism on it. And I think that's what theosophy does. Theosophy is not an ism.
So, what does theosophy offer for a perspective shift related to this topic, related to karma and reincarnation and the impact on life? What is that actual perspective shift?
Well, one of the elements that come into play there is that in order to make such a massive change, it will take time. So there's the idea of cycles, for instance, that we go through. And those cycles have their ups and downs, and there are ups and downs within upward cycles and upward in downward cycles. So because it is so difficult to change the human perspective on things, because we're all born in an ism, whether that's religious or political or whatever. And changing that for, let's say now, 8 billion people is not going to happen overnight. So in Theosophy, we also have that idea of the cycles. And how are you going to do that if there is no such thing as reincarnation and karma? Because in order to change humanity and bring them back in a distant future with certain tendencies that keep moving humanity forward in a more harmonious way, you need something that extends beyond death. Otherwise, you got to start over and over and over and over again in every person's life. So.
Jerry?
I think, for me at least, the reincarnation and karma ideas go to the heart of raising yet again the question, who am I? It strikes right at the heart of what does it mean to be human and the who am I question. So in conventional culture, materialistic culture, the one life culture, we are hyper focused on the persona, the mask, the temporary self, as some traditions would put it, and the values attached to that. Reincarnation and karma flip that and say, okay, let's assume not that you live once or that you are this set of traits and that set of traits will last forever in heaven or die altogether and disappear after you die. Let's assume that there's something called soul. There's something called self. There's some deeper part of oneself that's evolving. And let's start asking questions about what's valuable to that aspect of our lives. So, our grandparents or wise parents or the wise amongst us, they know that there's no happiness inherent in wealth or inherent in fame or inherent in power. They know that. Our wise grandparents are aware that the relationships, the love, the contentment, the insight, the learning, these are things much, much more valuable than anything material. And I think that that's true because there's a perspective shift from, this personal perspective, from an immortal soul perspective. What's valuable to the immortal part of ourselves? I think that's what this topic pushes us towards, just to reevaluate what's important, reevaluate what's meaningful.
Yeah, that's great, Jerry. And like you said, it really just goes like sort of right to the core of one of the biggest questions we ask, right? And so when we bring that question of who am I or what am I, what are we, when we bring that to the question of reincarnation, it automatically comes out as a question, what reincarnates? What actually
Exactly.
does carry on? So maybe we can move into that a little bit if people have things they want to bring in with that topic. What is it, at least in a theosophical viewpoint, what transitions from one life to the next and what doesn't go from one life to the next?
Mm-hmm. Well, so,
and then it also raises the question of what is life for? Go ahead, Pierre. I'm sorry.
but if you can't just pose that the most fundamental question we have to ask ourselves first is, who am I? Because within the context of a single life, it also doesn't mean anything. Because by the time you figure it out, you're dead, it's over and done. If there is no extension of that. So again, you have to put meaning primal to everything. Meaning is connected with motive also and potentiality. And that leads then in its activity, karma, to function. So what we need to do as human being is to learn what meaning represents and what does function also represent in life. You can if you're a more metaphysical person, you can just exchange function here for archetypal approaches to things. But those are really fundamental, meaning and function. And then the question of who am I gets a much more broader view because it extends over death. It extends beyond our single life. And then the question becomes important. Who are we? Are we just physical beings? Does consciousness emerge from the brain, or does it come through the brain? How did it get in there in the first place? So those are, but you immediately end up with elements that transcend our usual conversations in life, because it takes it to a level where you have to start philosophizing and bring in metaphysics. There's no other way around it.
Pierre, could you elaborate on what you mean by function? That kind of goes right over my head. What are you talking about when you're saying about the importance of function?
Well, if you pose meaning as the most important element that we need to consider, because we give meaning to everything, the fact that we have meaning and put that in practice leads to a functional approach to life. Everything we do is functional. Eating, sleeping, doing whatever in life is functional. So that's the next step down. And then after that, if we need to execute a function in a harmonious way, what does that entail? Knowledge.
So, but
Yep.
function means the use of something?
The application of meaning has to
Okay,
be
okay.
functional. And we do
So
that
if we have
automatically with everything. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah. Well, if we're raised with like strict materialism, that kind of viewpoint, then we do automatically, I think humans in general, we apply meaning to things, and then once we have that concept of meaning, then we act on it. So what is the meaning that most people are acting on? That goes back to sort of what you brought up earlier, Jerry, with, well, or Wes brought up too, let's equilibrize the system, or life would be better if I had more money. Like those are meanings we've decided upon and then applied. And so theosophy provides a different context for meaning. So we have different meanings that we are applying. So, for instance, in theosophy, we have a view of an individual human as a essential inherent part of a larger whole. And so part of meaning comes from that concept, which means that we have things like universal brotherhood and altruism as sort of core ethical principles that we'll put into action into the world, where we might not have those principles if we're not exposed to that more sort of metaphysical level of investigation that theosophy promotes.
It kind of points out the need to at least encourage some people to take up these kinds of questions. In other words, I think most human beings, in the backs of their minds, in their very busy lives, all things we have to do, have these kind of nagging questions. These things that wake people up in the middle of the night, make us wonder about things. But I think that for most people, I don't know if we're all going to get that far in our thinking to think about process and meaning and so forth explicitly. So maybe what we need is just enough human beings to sort of you know take up this project, this whole Emersonian ideal of trying to figure out what the meaning of life might be, and to consider these kinds of things, because uh, I don't know if most people will go through the entire philosophical process that we've been talking about. I just don't see most people, not at least not in this lifetime. It seems to be something that takes, I don't know, maybe takes many lifetimes to get to that point. But it would seem like if the social reform aspects of things don't work, at least the way they're being applied, if the isms don't work, if the religions don't work, scientific materialism doesn't work, then at least some folks could be persuaded to kind of follow this path of some kind of attempt at self-discovery. So then the question would be for everybody else, the larger framework of some clearly stated ideals: universal brotherhood, karma, reincarnation in as simple terms as and practical terms as possible may be all that they're going to be able to assimilate, given all the complexities of life and responsibilities that people have, and frankly limitations because of their own, not just this history, this lifetime, but many past lives of thinking along certain well-defined ways of regarding the world. And it's Blavatsky uses an interesting term about ethics in one of her works. She talks about the need to inculcate ethics, just sort of to nurture gently by gentle repetition and example of these kinds of ideas. And she really thinks that it's crucial to how we educate the next generation, because after all, if we could educate, train a few individuals each generation, 20, 30 years, we could change the direction of everybody else if we had this sort of ethics, universal brotherhood, karma, reincarnation as a backdrop, some kind of assumptions that kind of become woven into the fabric of things. I don't know how to go about doing this. Maybe that goes back to Pete's
That would
question
have
about
to be inculcated in education.
slow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
From
yeah.
the very
And it's a slow
early
process.
age.
Very,
Yeah.
very,
Can
very
I?
true. But yeah.
You go ahead first, Jerry. Oh, sorry, Wes. You're done.
No,
Go ahead, Jay.
I'll go after you, John. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking. So one of the ways we can go about things to get some kind of get our mind and wrap it around karma and reincarnation a bit is to take the metaphysical approach. Like we can go through the philosophy. We can sort of we're analyzing first principles, and we're working through from that, right? If we don't do that, my overall question, for sort of following up on what you were outlining, was my overall question would be, okay, does the idea of reincarnation require blind belief or a suspension of disbelief? Because none of us in our waking conscious activity have knowledge of or memory or direct experience with either past or future lives. So what is it that, how do you move from a disbelief in reincarnation to a belief in it without it being just blind acceptance? That's Jerry, go ahead.
Okay, so good point. Good question. Again, the philosopher and philosophy itself is not asking the individual to believe things and then be done with it. The philosopher is one, I believe, to use that word twice, who's willing to experiment with truth. It's so let's predominantly our culture and our education is all around opinions and beliefs. But the scientist knows, and the philosopher knows, and actually the spiritual aspirant knows that this whole thing's an adventure. This enormous adventure that ought not to be short-circuited and to be underestimated. So take whatever ideas make sense to you, that speak to you, and try them out. Put them on for size. Wear them for a while. See how it changes your life. So we've been running around thinking that we only live once. Let's set that aside. That experiment, we've tried that. It's not working very well. Let's assume for a second we're immortal souls. Let's try that for a while. Just think about yourself that way. How would life be different from that perspective? How would life be different if there was universal law that there's no thought, no feeling, no action, no word that doesn't have consequences that will come back to you? Universal responsibility. Wear that for a while. Just try it out for a while. See how that changes your life. I can guarantee you, if you were to do that, one thing that would happen is you would become a much more mindful person, a lot less passive than we currently tend to be. So I think that's what great teachers are trying to get human beings to do isn't to believe things. It's to start experimenting with truth. And I think that's we can ask anyone to do that without having to change their religion or change their political party or change their ethnicity. No, you try an idea on for size.
And yet that could be a really scary endeavor. You start
Absolutely.
questioning one's
Absolutely.
fundamental assumptions. I mean, it goes back to my previous point. Maybe, I don't know if everybody's going to be willing to do that, but we certainly could ask them to suggest it.
But the point isn't to get everybody to do anything.
No, we won't get them to do it. They have to somehow see a value. I was riding in the car a while back with my older grandson, and he noticed this red maple tree turning all bright colors. And he went, "Wow, it's going to lose its leaves real soon." I said, "Yep." He said something like, "Huh, I wonder if we're kind of like that. We'll just let it go. Just let it sink in." I said, "Yep, I think so." So, it wasn't something I taught him. It's something it came to him. Now, I don't know if that's a good example for everybody, but it somehow has to. If you nudge people, ourselves, we nudge ourselves a little bit. Sometimes it's surprising how far we can go with an idea. So we have to try. I think you're absolutely right, Jerry. It's a absolutely worthy and necessary experiment. But as Gandhi found out, experiments with truth can have consequences that we just can't predict, and it might be kind of scary to do that for a lot of human beings. But it seems necessary. So maybe just a little of this knowledge is what's necessary. Not a lot, not for everybody, but just nudging ourselves a little bit in these directions could have profound consequences for our society.
And I would even
for-
say that blind belief there is functional,
No,
because
nothing about blind belief.
anything you want to investigate and that you don't know, you have to start with blind belief. You got to start somewhere. You make
That it's
assumptions about
possible.
things,
Yeah,
and assumptions are
that's right.
opinions, and they're
And
very much related to sensory perception. And there you have that threefold division of knowledge or understanding of Plotinus, as we say here: opinion, opinion, reason, and illumination. But the opinion is very much related to blind belief. Everybody has his own opinion, but it doesn't mean that it is knowledge, and it's usually based on sensory perception. But if you keep investigating, you come to reason, and that becomes like, it's still a belief, but it becomes an informed belief, science, the dialectic, and so forth. And then hopefully, if you can push that far enough, you may come to a confirmed belief, an intuitive understanding of things, which you can then call illumination, because anytime we understand something, the bulb goes up. It illuminates something. And those are three important stages that we all go through: blind belief, informed belief, and confirmed belief. And then beyond.
Mm-hmm.
And our opinions start with our observations very often.
Sensory
Whatever's been
observations.
taught
Yeah.
to us, exactly. It may be what we've been taught since we were born. Maybe the assumptions around us are all part of that opinion. Some can be accurate and some not. Some opinions are very valid, but if they're not tested, as you indicated, then they're just kind of a kind of belief. So
So
you look
blind belief,
at
we all start with blind belief, and that's just fine.
of some
Get
sort,
going.
yeah.
Investigate.
Well,
But we can do better.
your upbringing, your education, your family, your culture casts upon each individual as they come into life a body of ideas that are generally accepted. And in a sense, the idea of philosophy is to sort through it for oneself, rather than to accept it because everyone believes it, or because some authority figure tells you so, or your parents told you so. That you become an individual agent and say, I'm going to determine for myself what's true and what's not true. And I'm going to trust my own best judgment to figure that out. And I'm not going to take anything as being true until I've evaluated for myself. That's the edict of self-reliance, which I think is at the heart of what the great teachers have to say, and certainly is the message of theosophy too. So just to go back just for a second about experimenting with an idea. So we've been, your typical person who believes that they are their personality, and that at the end of life, either you're going to go to heaven or hell, that there's nothing that happens afterwards. When you get our age and older, not John's age, but the rest of us, you start saying, well, why do I have to die? Why is there death? Why do I have to die? Well, that's a question posed from the standpoint of the one life doctrine and that identification with a personality. So let me switch that just for fun. Let's just do a mental experiment. Let's assume we're an immortal soul and we've lived again and again and again and again and again. Well, now the question isn't so much why do I have to die, but the question becomes why was I born? And to do what? You see, it's a radical reorientation of thinking to take on an idea like the immortality of the soul, which reincarnation encourages. It's a radical reorganization of thinking to think that every single thing you do and say and feel has consequences beyond myself and back to myself.
Karma.
So, karma.
Yeah.
So I think this is what we're invited to do is to, do what human beings are supposed to do. Do some thinking. Do some questioning.
I think an important element here too, Jerry, is because when you start, we have to relentlessly question things, but we have to be careful that questioning, or that in that questioning, we can leave our likes and dislikes on the side, and really approach everything from a truly open perspective. Is it true? And how can I investigate whether it is true or not? And leave aside your likes and dislikes, which is tough because 99.9% of all the things we do every day is based on our likes and dislikes. Yeah. So
we don't have any training in philosophy, so we want quick results, quick solutions.
I want to know now. Now.
Yeah,
Give me the answer.
So it very may well be that someone who's adopted a more philosophical approach to life may not feel like they're getting any traction with their questions for 20, 30, 40 years, but they're content to explore. And I think that's needs to be reinvigorated in the mental life of humanity is the joy and the adventure of trying to think things through. And I think theosophy is all about trying to get people to do free thinking, independent thinking. And like Pierre and Wes, you've been both saying, doing it without prejudice, without the baggage of having to profess you believe in one thing or another.
And that also goes to say that just believing in karma or reincarnation is not enough. You can believe that for the rest of your life without really doing anything with it or investigating it. So what is behind that? There is the meaning, the purpose, the function, and what are we going to do with it in the future, right, or in the now, whatever you want to call it.
You guys remind me of what the first magazine that Blavatsky was working with was called The Spiritual Scientist, and I always really liked that term because that's sort of what you're bringing up, Jerry, is essentially that we have to shift our worldview a little bit to imagine ourselves as a kind of laboratory and treat our mental life scientifically the way we are. In science, we're exploring matter and we're exploring it as a culture in exactly the way that you're talking about. And we just need to apply that. It's essentially the scientific method that you're talking about, but it's an internal application of the scientific method. Now, one of the things I find really tricky with the idea of reincarnation goes back to something you brought up, Wes, which was our opinions are often initially informed by our sensory perception and experiences. The difficulty with reincarnation is that we're not going to have a really a direct sensory engagement with the reality of reincarnation. So if reincarnation is a real thing, it's not necessarily going to be something that we're just going to encounter, because it goes beyond our waking normal state of consciousness, and how our memory operates, and our self-identity and all these things. So then I think it goes to what Jerry said, is you kind of just have to take the idea on and try it on and see. And even even in that, if you take Jerry's approach and you say, okay, I'm going to take on the idea of reincarnation, I'm going to test it out, I'm going to test out karma and reincarnation in my life, you're not necessarily gonna come to the kind of result that you would have in a scientific experiment, where you're going to get an answer, a direct answer. Reincarnation, yes, is true. It's not necessarily that you're gonna weigh the idea of reincarnation in your mind, and at some point, 20 or 30 years down the road, you're gonna know 100% guaranteed reincarnation is true because I have direct experience of that, or I've tested it and I've seen the result. It's going to be more like the results are going to be more uh, in how life actually plays itself out if you take those ideas on. So the result isn't going to be knowledge of reincarnation necessarily. The result might be an improved life.
Or in clarification of things that are troubling you or concerning you, or that you're curious about. When you try on an idea, part of it is to see if it throws light on other aspects of your life, and it helps to explain things that were previously confusing. So it's not like you get it's called dichotomous thinking. It's either true or false. Nothing in life works on that black and white, maybe computers. But everything grows gradually, and awareness, understanding, love, compassion, courage, all of these things grows incrementally, very, very slowly over time. So when we try on an idea like reincarnation or karma, it's not going to be like you're going to get to, like you were saying, John, where it's going to be lights on, lights off. It's going to be that a little bit of light is shined on something that was confusing, or something you were really struggling to understand. All of a sudden now it starts to make a little bit more sense.
Well,
And then it gives you the feeling that, okay, I'm on the right track. Let's keep going with this. This is let's think about it more deeply. Let's adopt that idea for a little bit longer to see where it leads me. So I think it's a gradual illumination. I'm sorry, Pierre, I didn't mean to cut you off.
You're right, and obviously the empirical approach is bound to fail from the very first second. You can't sit next to somebody's deathbed and then they die and let's follow them and see if they come back. Well, that's a ridiculous thought. And the problem there with science is very often that they only accept proof on a physical level, because you have to be able to repeat things. But there must be proof on a different level than the purely empirical. There must be proof on a psychic and a mental and a spiritual level. And I think that's where our focus should be. What might those proofs be? And that goes back to what John had to say about investigating beyond the result of being objectively to being able to say, yeah, we come back. But there has to be even a reasonable proof to point in that direction, I think.
But we do get other kinds of evidence, you could say. It doesn't.
There you go.
This kind of search doesn't happen in a vacuum. In other words, it's not just by itself. I'm going to start thinking about karma and reincarnation and universal brotherhood, and somehow it's going to transform my life. No, we start to see it in interactions. If we read it all, we'll run across stories of reincarnation. We'll run across numerous thousands of accounts of out of body experiences, near death experiences. We may run across some of the great scriptures of many different traditions that talk about multiple lives and that kind of thing. Or we read biographies of great men and women, and we see that there's more than just the superficial in their lives. So we get corroboration in unexpected areas. It's only when we start to look for those things that they show up. It would be like an astronomer only having a microscope. And if we only said, well, the only thing I can see in my microscope is the only thing I'm going to accept, and I'm never going to look at the stars, we're not going to be a very good astronomer. I mean, it's a poor analogy, but if the only evidence that we're willing to accept is tangible physical proof, or somebody sitting in front of us and letting us follow them through a state, some state of awareness, even that's not going to be proof to the next scientist that comes along and says, well, that was just your experience, just your subjective brain experience. It all happened in your cerebral cortex, and none of it actually happened. So how are you going to prove it to me? And so you get this endless loop of what's called proof that never doesn't prove anything. So I think you made a really good point. It becomes a whole kind of Socratic dialogue, Socratic question of about what is my life? What does it mean? That takes all kinds of unexpected turns, and evidence comes from places we didn't think it would come. But if we don't ask the questions, we'll never get to the point of even approximating answers. If it's even about getting answers, it's, I think, just as much about the journey as it is about a final destination. But some useful milestones or some landmarks along the way, like just the suggestion of universal brotherhood, the suggestion of karma and of reincarnation and what those implications might be. Those are among the unexpected, perhaps, discoveries that we make in maybe the life of the Buddha or of Jesus or some other great figure that give us intimations, what Wordsworth called intimations of immortality. They're not proofs, but boy, they are suggestive, and they're transformative, or can be. Again, it's the indeterminate nature of these kinds of experiments, is that they because they're about ourselves and our lives. We're not just automatons. Human beings aren't not computers that we can direct a program and say this is how it's going to end up.
That subject brings us back to a subject that John and I discussed in a previous podcast, that distinction between subjective and objective idealism. That is, the subjective idealist is somebody who accepts that there are abstractions, but those abstractions are just abstractions. Whereas in theosophy, the objective idealist, a lot of those abstractions are also realities on their own plane, and that immediately extends and broadens the perspective on things so that there is proof on those higher levels of perception. Go ahead, Sherry.
Plato's theory of forms, sure. Objective idealism, that's a good term. Yeah.
Jerry, you wanted to add something in?
Yeah, I just wanted to give an example of, I appreciate all the different perspectives everyone's bringing to this topic. It's wonderful to have this conversation. I wanted to bring in an example of trying to figure something out and how bringing the reincarnation and karma ideas into the equation threw some light on something. So early in my life, I discovered, even as a teenager, that as I would meet various people, some of them I would have immediate rapport with, immediate feeling of friendship and camaraderie. It no effort whatsoever. It was like instantly. Other people, animosity, judgment, hard feelings. And I saw these things happening with myself. I kept a journal and I'd write these things down. Why does that guy piss me off? Or why does that why was it so easy to get along with so-and-so who I just met yesterday? So, for the longest time, it was such a mystery that these reactions I would have and these relationships I was building and the various things I was doing in my life didn't make any sense or rhyme no reason to it. Then when I heard about reincarnation, I thought to myself, well, what if I had relationships with these people before, with these souls before? I have history with these people of some sort, perhaps. And maybe that's coming back. Maybe the reason it doesn't take any effort whatsoever to feel, a camaraderie with this person is I built a relationship with them, and it's carried over in some way. And the reason I instantly disliked so-and-so is I, had the opposite experience with such an individual. Now, I don't know if any of that's true or false, but the minute I heard about reincarnation, I thought that's a possible explanation for those experiences.
That's a good example. I like that, I find it interesting, these kind of conversations. We're trying to talk about karma and reincarnation, and it's always fascinating among a group of theosophists because the ideas are all, there's a web of different ideas that are all together. So you can't just talk about one thing. It's kind of like you have to talk about all the different parts, right? But we sort of got to a point where Jerry and Wes, you were both sort of talking about like what makes a theosophist, which isn't belief. It isn't a system that you believe or something. It's actually an encouragement to explore, to test, and such. And I was thinking about, when you guys were talking, I was thinking about Gandhi as an example, because we can say, he spent how many decades dedicated all day, every day to the idea of nonviolence. And we can say Gandhi didn't prove anything about nonviolence empirically the way we would expect a on-off, true-false kind of idea in science, right? But his life is the proof, right? Like there's a demonstration of, what if I took this idea and lived it in life? What would that look like? And then we see what that result is. And so we actually have to shift a little bit our perspective on what evidence is, even shift a bit our perspective of what truth is. Is truth just empirical? Do we need just sort of strict data to say something is true or not? Or is the truth in the demonstration itself? You see somebody do something. You see Alex Honnold climb a skyscraper, and you go, okay, so the proof is in the demonstration of what is possible, right? So it's really interesting, because I think we get sort of to the core of what it is to be a theosophist, or what it is to be you could use the word occultist if you want, but somebody who's really testing and trying to test and verify within their own laboratory all of these ideas. The proof that comes from that is actually the lived experience and the relational experience that results. People were observing what Gandhi was doing. It wasn't just inside his own mind. There was a demonstration of it. So that, to me, gets more to sort of how we have to approach ideas like karma and reincarnation here.
Yeah, and those are examples, the kinds of examples we start to run across. We tend to run across when we start asking these kinds of questions. We start running across the Alex Honnold's of the world, and the stories of Gandhi, or of the Buddha, or of Jesus, or or of Thoreau, or King, or any of these kinds of individuals. They sort of float to the center of our consciousness, become more aware of those kinds of individuals. And then if we can draw some parallels between how they think and what kind of direction we might we ourselves might want to try to pursue. So it's not a fixed path. It's more of a kind of a general recognition that there are mountains worth climbing. Yeah, that it's something worth doing in that direction. Now, I can't climb half dome the easy way with somebody's ladder put in place for the last 600 feet of it. I couldn't begin to do what Kyle does because it's just, for me, it would be insane. For him, it's a very measured and practical and practiced set of disciplines that gets him to that place. So just the idea that there are these kinds of pathways for humans is very encouraging. But for the average person, I really think some simple declarations, maybe not so much things to believe. I think Jerry's right. Ideas to try out: universal brotherhood, karma, reincarnation, interconnectedness of life. Those are really powerful and deceptively simple ideas. Really are really valuable to people in totally unexpected ways, with all sorts of corroborations that we couldn't tell anybody about ahead of time, because they have to discover those things themselves. And it's just in human nature that there's something there that's again, Wordsworth words, worthy of immortality. Oh no, that's Blavatsky. Inner key to theosophy, use that wonderful phrase that there's something in each human being worthy of immortality. And with that, then it's some idea of the permanent nature, call it soul, well, whatever you want, whatever is useful, most useful term, and whatever one's background brings one to. Soul works, but it's just an overworked term, so we have to kind of redefine it as we go. I think the distinction made between something that we are and something that we have is a useful place to start, because it's not something we acquire, like a better shirt, a better jacket, or a pair of shoes or something. No, it's something that we are. So it's something really she says, worthy of immortality. So what promotes that immortality, and what promotes that sense of purpose, a sense of justice? I think karma and reincarnation do that for most individuals that are willing to consider it as a working hypothesis, I suppose.
I have a good quote to kind of draw this together that I wanted to share. And it doesn't use the words karma and reincarnation at all, but it has to do with what Wes is talking about, this experimentation and, the meaning function concepts that Pierre has been sharing. And this is from Thoreau. And Thoreau says, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and to see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear. Nor did I wish to practice resignation, unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms, and if it proved to be mean, why then to get the whole and genuine meanness out of it, and publish its meanness to the world, or, if it were to be sublime, to know it by experience, and to be able to give true account of it in my next excursion.
Well, I
That's
guess
great.
there can be nothing more liberating than taking the broadest possible hypothesis in the approach of life,
Yeah.
and then what
And Thoreau,
doesn't fit, drop it, and what remains is it useful.
yeah, and he wasn't a
And
hermit, and he was within walking distance of the town. So like he was disappeared from the face of
You
the
can
earth.
do it.
Still went
You
in
can do it
town and picked
anywhere.
jobs and worked, and and went back to Walden Pond and considered what it was, it was all about. It's a wonderful, wonderful essay. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jerry.
What I really like about all of this and the whole discussion we're having is actually, earlier I posed a question of what is the perspective shift that we're looking for, and I think we're kind of hit the nail on the head now with it, because the perspective shift in a certain sense is to actually take life on as an adventure. Like it's actually to just, like the way Thoreau presents that is that he's not looking for empirical truth the way we might think of it scientifically and stuff. He's looking for lived experience. And he's like, I'm going to go for this with everything I have. And if I go for it with everything I have, whatever the truth is that comes to me in that experience, that's the truth I'm looking for. I'm not looking for what I want it to be. I'm looking
And
for
it'll
what
be
it is.
yeah.
And what is the use of it? What is the practicality of it? So we take life on as an adventure. We take life on as a spiritual scientist. We use ourselves as a laboratory. We test ideas. We see what comes out of it. People like Thoreau and Gandhi really paved the way with presenting what it looks like to turn life into just a grand adventure. And for me, that's just part and parcel of what we mean when we say a theosophist.
Every human a researcher.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, that's great.